Welcome back to the Stanley Way XJ build. In today's video, I'm going to replace the old 25-year-old wore-out suspension of this Jeep with an inexpensive 3-inch lift from Rough Country. Let's get started. So let's go over what this kit includes. Now there's two types of 3-inch lifts from Rough Country. Actually probably more than that, but I had two that I was going to choose from. As you see back here in the back, I have two brand new leaf springs. I chose to go with the one that gives you the leaf springs instead of an add a leaf because my springs are so wore out. I want to replace the whole thing. So this kit here costs $659. That's as of March 2024. The cheaper kit is $400. Comes with everything you see here, but only an add a leaf. Of course, you know an add a leaf, that's just a helper spring, and you retain your factory springs. Take the U-bolts out, put the helper spring inside there, and you're done with the rear. So it's a little bit easier with the rear. You don't have sagging springs that'll work. Probably every XJ at this point has sagging springs. You got two options for the U-bolts, all the way over here for the leaf springs, and you got the hardware. That's for the two different axles. So as you probably know, the XJ has either a Dana 35 or a Chrysler 8 1/4 rear axle. Good thing is mine has the 8 1/4 rear axle. So you got a little bit smaller U-bolt over there for the Dana 35. And the bigger U-bolts are for the Chrysler 8.25. When you lift it, you also want to do something about your sway bar links. So these here are to drop down the mount of the sway bar from the frame. Just unbolt those, bring it down, put those spacers in there. You don't have to buy new sway bars. I'm not going to install that part because I have new sway bar links, but that's going to be a separate video. Two brand new 3-inch lift coil springs. Shocks for the front, shocks for the rear. Got hardware for the new shocks. And then two brand new lower control arms. This is for the front axle. What these are going to do is try to correct the geometry that's going to be changed by lifting the front axle. What you don't see here is new hardware, aside from U-bolt hardware and a little bit of hardware for the shocks. So you're going to want to be careful with your hardware, try to retain it. If you know that your hardware is going to break, which I'm pretty sure hardware is going to break on this, you might want to go ahead and get brand new hardware, so when you go to lift this thing, you can just knock it out at one time and be done. But I'm just going to wait and see what breaks, and I have another vehicle I can go to the store with and buy new bolts as I need it. What an idiot. I hate when I cause myself more work. I was going to measure it to see how much of a lift this is. So I'm going to lower it back down, do some measurements, see how much of a lift it actually is. Right at about 32 inches. More like 31 7/8. And driver's side rear, we're at about 29.5. Passenger side front is at about 33.5. So it's sagging on the driver's side. Oh, wait a minute. Still got the jack up. Dummy. Cut. Now let's start that completely over again. You get a redneck with a lift, gets all excited, doesn't think straight. I didn't let the jacks all the way down. Let's try again. Driver's side front, 31 inches. 31 1/8 to be exact. Driver's side rear with a ball tire, about 29 7/8. Passenger side front, about 31 3/8. And passenger side rear, right at 30. Let's do this again. Shall we? We shall. First thing we're going to do is take the shocks off, pop the hood. And the top mount on the driver's side is right here for the shock. Shock comes all the way down. Then you got two bolts down here in the bottom. Now one thing you can do is you can take the bottom mount off first And then you can set a wrench in here. It's not very easy to get a ratchet where you can get this off really quick. A lot of times you can break this nut loose. You can just take the housing and you just twist it and twist it on out. Get it out a lot faster. I'm gonna give this a shot. Loosen it up like this. The nut's 15 millimeter. And if you try to loosen it, you'll see a lot of times that the stud's gonna move. That's with the entire housing. If you try to hold it with this, it's got two flat spots on the stud. You can hold it with a wrench, and it is size adjustable wrench. Let's just see what happens here. I don't see this working out too good. Nah, it's not. And I sprayed everything with PB Blaster yesterday. There we go, that wasn't too bad. My housing is turned, you can actually reach it like this and just turn that housing like I was talking about. Now the bottom mount got 13 millimeter bolt head and 13 millimeter nut on the bottom. Now the passenger side shock mount's a little easier to get to. It's right down there. You can get to it with a socket and an extension. Now on the passenger side, the top nut is easier to get to, but of course it's spinning this stuck quite a bit. Trying to get it by myself, it's not that easy. Yes, my working with you can just have them hold the bottom down here. And to show you how bad this shock is, I've removed the bottom mount, the bolts out of the mount, and of course it doesn't even move, it just sits there. So that thing is useless. So what you can do is get a strap wrench. If you don't have one, you can take an old serpentine belt, put around it like this, clamp some vice grips on it, spin it around, put it inside the spring, and then loosen it from the top. And bingo. Now it's like a third hand. More like a third and fourth hand. Now on the next step, Rough Country tells you to remove the sway bar links. But the kit does not come with extended sway bar links. I bought those separate. So I'm not going to show that in this video. But if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, something that you could do, this is the sway bar link or the sway bar drop bracket. What you could do, just take these two bolts out here of what mounts the sway bar mount to the frame, take those loose on both sides. That way the entire sway bar drops down, and then whenever you drop this axle down to remove the spring and install the lower control arm, the sway bar is going to go with it. Since you have to disconnect these anyway, you might as well just take all that down. So there's nothing there to really get in the way. So that can drop down with the axle, and then you don't have to deal with messing with this stuff, because that could be a pain in the butt. I'm going to take them off anyway because they're going to be replaced. Just want to let you know that. Top nut 17 millimeter, and the bottom's 19 millimeter. Luckily I was able to get the other side off with a wrench because the drag link and the steering stabilizer is in the way, so I couldn't get my impact in there. But if you did need to hold this, it takes a T55 Torx bit, fits right in the head of it, fits nice and strong. So now you've got this coil clip, retains the bottom of the coil spring. It's 13 millimeter. Take it out. And I know some of you guys from up north are jealous to the fact that there's next to no rust in this thing. I live in South Alabama. This thing spent most of its life in Georgia. I am very thankful I don't live in a salt belt and have very mild winters. If you're tired of all that mess, come move down here. But only if you vote like I vote. Now the passenger side clip was just like the driver's side, came right out, 13 millimeter. So now Rough Country tells you to drop the axle down, not do anything with the control arm yet. They want you to drop the axle down, make enough room to be able to get this coil spring out. So at this point you might want to follow instructions because it can get kind of dangerous. I'm pretty sure they want you to keep the control arms on there, that way you don't lose the axle. Now it does have 2 upper and 2 lower, so you can probably take the 2 lower out and may give you a little more flex or whatever, but I'm just going to see what I can do here. Now if I can't even get the stock springs out like this, there's no way I'm going to be able to get the lift springs in there. So I'm just going to mess around with it and see. Now I don't really want to cause myself any more work. I do have coil spring compressors. I may just do that, I don't know. But I'm going to go ahead and take the lower control arms out since I got to do that anyway. I don't want to make myself work any harder than I have to do any extra work by removing the upper control arms. So I'm going to remove those, see what I got from there. Let me show you what I'm contending with here. That nut there, because of the differential, can't put my impact there. Can't even put my socket in there because it needs a deep well. Anyway, I ended up putting an open-end wrench on that nut, and of course couldn't break it with just the wrench. So I had to make a breaker bar out of 2 wrenches, reaching all the way out here. I was able to get enough leverage to break it loose. It's 21mm nut, so the passenger side is wide open. I'll be able to get an impact on it. Now with the axle supported with both jacks, got a little bit of weight off of it. I'm gonna see if I can knock these bolts out with the lower control arm. Have I told you that I've never done this before? Could be obvious, but I'm not afraid of trying something I've never done. Put it on YouTube and get trashed in the comments. Oh, we got movement. Not really. Oh yeah. So now just a little comparison of old springs versus new springs. And the new springs are not that much taller than the old springs, so I might be able to get them in without having to use spring compressors, and that'd be a good thing. One thing though that I almost forgot is I got new spring seats. These go up against the unibody frame, and your new coil spring is going to sit on there like that. Old ones are probably wore out. I know mine are. You might want to get these if you put this lift on, because the lift does not come with them, and this is something that you definitely have to do all this over again to replace this. Everything else you could pretty much replace without taking the axle completely loose from the Jeep, but these you can't. So replace these when you go to do this lift. Little goes at the top, big goes at the bottom. Something else I forgot, brake lines kind of tight. Let's relieve that pressure. Now let's see what kind of trouble we can get into. Now what I like to use are the McPherson strut compressors. The reason why, because if you get a regular coil spring compressor, you got to put that compressor inside the spring, and then it's a pain in the butt to get out. You may not be able to get it out once you put it in there. McPherson strut, these go on the outside, so it's 2 of them. Go on the outside, both sides of the spring. That way they're easy to take off. So anything like this, but any type of puller especially, you want to make sure there's anti-seize or at least oil on the threads so you don't gall them up when they're under tension. Alright. This stupid thing trying to come off. Now, you want to line up the bottom of this spring. I'll show you here in a second. You can turn it even with it. No spring compressor on it. You can turn it. You want the bottom line up to where the end is in this spot right here. For the passenger side, I moved the spring compressors up one more coil. So 3 coils in the bottom, that way the threaded portions won't stick down below the spring. Tighten it up quite a bit off the Jeep. And now this side's a little bit more difficult because you have the brand new spring on the other side pushing this side up. I'm gonna use a little angle iron that I've got, maybe as a pry bar, stick up in here. Maybe this will help me get that spring in. Now we'll put the coil spring retainer back in, making sure the coil spring is lined up where it should be. So now with our coil springs in place, I'm going to go ahead and take the lower control arms out so we can replace those. And I got the passenger side out with the impact. And of course, the driver's side drive shaft is in the way, so I'm going to have to use wrenches again. I actually ended up with an extension and socket, getting a breaker bar in there, breaking that loose, had to break it loose with my foot. And finish it off with the ratchet. Now if you look, this is slotted, so there is an adjustment for the lower control arms. It's adjusted all the way back right now because it was a stock height. So if you want to use the stock control arms, just know that when the axle drops down, it's actually going to come aft or back. That's going to change your suspension geometry. So that's going to change what's called caster, which means your axle is going to change the way it's rotated this way. That's caster. It could cause death wobble, all types of other things. There is an adjustment here the alignment shop can do. 2 bolts here in the back. Push that in and out. We're going to leave that alone because we have new control arms. Now something I did have to do just now, unbolted the track bar, let the jacks down a little bit so I can move this axle back and forth to get this to line up. Not much, just a little bit. So now I'm having to push this axle forward again on this side. A helper would be great. Something else you could do is have something over here, another vehicle or up front, do a cargo strap to a tree or another vehicle, pull this forward, you won't have to do this. Oh. Woo. Let's see. I'm going to push this forward and beat it in at the same time. Woo, get in there. All right. Now the lower control arm bolts are pretty good. They're in great shape along with the nuts. I'm not going to replace those. I'm going to tighten those down, but I'm not going to torque them. I'm actually going to just tighten the nut up to the frame and leave it there. Whenever we put it on its own weight, that's when everything's going to get torqued down. I'm going to take our new shock hardware, put on here. That of course goes on the shock, and this will go on the bottom of the frame. Then up there in the engine compartment, this side will go on like that. That will sandwich the frame like so, and a nut on top. Take our bolts in there for the lower mount. I am going to replace those. That's going to be at a later date. They're easy to replace at any time, so I'm not worried about that. And at this point, if you want to, you can go ahead and tighten those lower bolts on the shock, because at this point it's not going to hurt anything. So now you want to hit this hole up here with that. Cut this wire. And put it in place. And I noticed as this was going up that I had this rubber piece upside down. You want that little portion that's ridged up, you want it to go into the frame. The flat side on the bottom and opposite with the top. But as you can see, this is not so strong that you can't push it down by hand. So if you make a mistake like I did, you can push it back down by hand and fix it. And of course the top one goes the opposite, with the raised portion go against the frame, the flat portion against this washer, just like that. And at this point we're about ready to put on some new wheels and tires. I don't have a sway bar link in here. That's because I'm going to change those out. The only time you need sway bar links is when you're driving on the highway. Makes it safer. You're actually combining the tension of both springs. Helps the truck not to sway so much. That's why it's called a sway bar. But off-road, you really want that disconnected anyway. So I'm going to leave those off for now. Shock is in place. Top and bottom's tight. I put the brake line bracket back on. And you shouldn't need brake line extensions with a 3-inch lift. And I've already flexed it out a little bit, and it gets, I wouldn't say tight, but it gets a little close. But I'm also not going to be doing rock crawling and extreme articulation, anything like that. So with all that in place, and we'll double check it. Spring looks good, everything's in place, the bottom's still mounted in. Let's mount some tires. Alright, so a little safety lesson for the day. Anytime you're doing anything like this, please be careful. Pull my jack stands out. I got the tire on the driver's side. I was letting the jack down to a reasonable height so I can get this tire on. And the jack slipped, shot straight back towards the back of the Jeep. And this thing came crashing all the way down. I'm not hurt. It's all good. Now let's talk about the tires that I chose for this. 31-10-50. R15. That size should be good with a 3-inch lift. Shouldn't need trimming. But I got the Venom Power Terra Hunter XT tires. Now these things have mixed reviews. Some people say they're great. Some people have a lot of balancing problems. We'll just see with mine. Something that's a little concerning is all these weights all over the place. A lot there, here, here, there, there. I used to work at a tire store, another one up here. We never did this. We never put that much weight all the way around, scattered all over the tire. So this makes me a little nervous. But I rarely drive over 55 miles an hour anyway. A lot of the guys that have issues, they're at highway speeds, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. So it may not ever give me any trouble. We'll see. Well, there you have it. Done, right? Squatted XJ is what everybody wants. Not quite. We're not doing squatted trucks on this channel. Now the rear is a lot more simple because you don't have as many different components, because the axle is actually located by the leaf springs. We're going to replace those leaf springs. So this is the rear sway bar. I'm going to delete it completely. I'm going to take it out. And your rear shock is here. It's got 2 studs all the way at the top. They usually break. So you have to get new hardware for that. 1 stud down here at the bottom, and then once the sway bar is out of the way, for U-bolt nuts, they could be a booger. Actually all the hardware on the rear could be really bad. Then you just got 1 bolt in the back, 1 bolt in the front for each leaf spring, and be done. So I'm going to show you the rear shock mounts all the way at the top of the rear shock, because I'm not going to be able to video that taking it out. Take those nuts off, hopefully they won't break, and 1 down here. So now I should be able to lower the jack with nothing else holding the axle. Maybe it'll come down. I've just noticed an issue. To be all nice, not mess stuff up, I put a 6x6 block underneath the jack, or on top of the jack underneath the axle, And that's as far down as the jack goes. The axle's still up there on the springs. Let me fix that. So what I ended up doing, leaving that jack there, I put the other jack on the other side, jacked it up, like a little bit of articulation, brought this side down some. Now let's get the spring off. Alright, so the saga of getting these leaf springs out continues. If you ever tried to get these out before or know somebody that has, especially if you tried to help them, you'll realize how difficult it is. My 3/8 adapter didn't make it. I don't know where my big 21mm socket is, so I went to Harbor Freight and I got 2 more impact sockets. $4 a piece, can't beat it. Went ahead and got some adapters and some other stuff, so I don't have to use angle iron. I got a couple pry bars and all that. You can't just go for the things you need, you gotta go there for the things you want too. My impact is so old, I think it's not very strong anymore. I bought it from Walmart over 20 years ago. Maybe it never was really that strong, but my bag's blown away. Bye, bag. But I didn't break my adapter with the impact. I broke it by standing on it with a breaker bar. So I'm hoping that I can get it out with a breaker bar. Let's try it. Just in case you don't know what we're talking about here, you got this bolt on the front of the leaf spring. If you look on the other side of the frame, you can't see the nut. So the nut is on the inside of the frame, so you can't get to it. You can try to spray penetrant up through those holes and try to hit it, but there's no guarantee that you're going to. And then the back bolts, at least the rear bolts, you can get to the head and the nut. So let's try these new sockets out. In the rear, I was able to get it loose with the breaker bar. And the bolt head, I'm holding it with an adjustable up against the bumper. So the impact's not making any more headway. Got the passenger side loose by using this breaker bar. And then my jack handle has an extension. Got it loose. Just got to wrench it off. If you have anybody that's in your family or a friend that likes CrossFit, you see they waste a lot of money at the gym, tell them don't go to the gym on Saturday. Come to my house, help me get the leaf springs off my Jeep. Good workout. I need a hospital. I think my shoulder's out of the socket. So, I'm happy that I got the front bolt out and the back bolt's coming out, but now it won't come out all the way because of the hitch. So watch out for this, guys. You got a hitch. Probably gonna have to take that out to get that bolt all the way out. And also, if you see that bolt right there at the top in the frame, I decided not to take that bolt out since I don't have to remove the whole shackle to replace the spring, because later on it's going to depend on ride height. I want to put a shackle relocation bracket in there, and I'll make a decision then if I want to add another inch of lift or maintain the lift I've got before I do that. So I want to leave that in place for now. That's why I didn't take that bolt out. So I ended up having to take the shackle all the way out because this hitch would not allow shackle bolt to come out for the leaf spring. And I tried to take the bumper off, and because of this hitch I can't get to all the bumper bolts, so I got it all the way out. I'm going to put this nasty busted shackle back in. So my neighbor's dog came to visit, say, hey Gizmo. So when you go to put the U-bolts back on, this plate won't fit over the nut for the centering pin of the new leaf springs. It's about a 5/8 nut. Get you a good step drill bit, drill it out. See some black paint in there so it won't rust anymore. Good to go. Alright, so I got the Jeep sitting on its own weight, got all the springs in, got to put the rear shocks in, tighten everything up to torque specs, be good to go. But I want to talk about something real quick about these rear shocks. If you've ever changed these shocks before, then you realize these studs on top, they break. Most people put bolts back in it. The problem is the bolts are real difficult to get to. You got to fish your hands way up in there, or a pair of pliers, something like that. Fish it down, put a nut on it, but then you also have to hold the head of the bolt with a wrench. So if you haven't seen these yet, get something like this. You can get these on Amazon, get them from Rough Country, all sorts of places. And what this does, you can fish this little field goal post all the way up into that frame, and then let your shock come all the way up, and then it comes with these bolts. Put the bolts in from the bottom, makes it very simple to install those. I think this kit right here cost 18 bucks for both shocks. So I'm going to put the shocks on. Of course, it's a nut at the bottom. I'm not going to show that. You're smart enough to know how to do that. So let's get with it. Now we're going to run through some torques. After you get the lifts completely installed and you get the Jeep sitting on its own weight, tires installed, all that good stuff, now you're going to want to go ahead and torque everything down. So from All Data DIYs, where I get my torque specs from, we're going to start with the control arms in the front. Now we only removed the lower arm, but I'm going to go ahead and give you both arm torque specs. So for the upper arm, the front nut is 55 foot-pounds, the rear nut is 66 foot-pounds. The lower arm, which is what we disconnected and replaced on this lift, the front and rear nut are both 85 foot-pounds. The track bar, if you replace that during the lift, the axle bracket bolt is 74 foot-pounds, and what they call the ball stud nut, which is the end that connects to the frame, is 60 foot-pounds. And if you replace the track bar bracket, the bolts are 92 foot-pounds, the nut is 74 foot-pounds, and the support bolts are 31 foot-pounds. Sway bar links, the upper nut's 27 foot-pounds, the lower nut is 70 foot-pounds. The rear, which I took mine completely out, and it's not going back in. But if yours is in and you need to torque it, the upper bolt is 108 inch-pounds, and the lower nut is 55 foot-pounds. Now the leaf springs, you're going to want to torque the U-bolt nut to 52 foot-pounds. The front pivot bolt, 115 foot-pounds. The upper shackle bolt, the upper shackle bolt, golly. The upper shackle bolt is the same as the front pivot bolt at 115 foot-pounds. And the lower shackle bolt is 80 foot-pounds. For your shocks, the front shock tells you to torque the upper nut at 96 inch-pounds, lower nut at 17 foot-pounds. And the rear shocks, the upper bolt 17 foot-pounds, the lower nut 46 foot-pounds. So now it's time for me to torque all these things and get this thing back on the road. So now for the moment that we've all been waiting for, well at least I've been waiting for, is how much height did we gain with a Rough Country 3-inch lift? Well, 3 inches, dummy. Not so fast, young man. We've got a little bit bigger tires, so that's going to add a little bit to the lift. And with aging springs, they start to sag a little bit. It's going to be a little bit more than that. But we also want to check manufacturers out to see if the 3-inch lift really is 3 inches. Or is it actually 2? I don't know. Let's find out. One thing we can say for sure is this thing looks way better than it did before. Let's do some measuring. 35 and a half, 36 and a quarter, 35 and a half, 35 and 7/8. So with all those figures, what does that mean? With my phone as a cheat sheet and the calculator, I did a little bit of figures to see exactly how much lift we got out of this thing. So the left front we gained 4.375 inches, the right front we gained 4.125 inches, in the left rear we gained 6.375 inches, in the right rear we gained 5.875 inches. So I broke that down in averages, front and rear. That gave us a lift average in the front of 4.250, 4 1/4 inches. And in the rear, we gained an average of 6 1/8 of an inch, or 6.125. But you also have to factor in the tires. So these tires are 31 1050 tires, but they actually measure 30 1/2 inches. The tires that came off of it were 28-inch tires. So if you do a little bit of math there, that's about a 2.5-inch difference in the tires. Now what you want to do is subtract that difference from the lift height. But you can't subtract the entire amount, not 2.5 inches, because obviously a car doesn't ride on the entire tire. The axle is centered in the middle of the hub, middle of the tire, so you just take half of that. Half of that is 1.25 inches, or 1.250. So when we figure all that together, we have a total lift height in the front of exactly 3 inches. In the back is 4.875 inches, which I think is 4 7/8 inches, so almost 5 inches in the back. Now that shows you how much the leaf springs were sagging in the back, and the front really wasn't sagging at all. It was right where it should be. So it appears that the Rough Country 3-inch lift is an actual 3-inch lift. 3 inches in the front, a little more in the back. This is also measurements taken a week after I put the lift on. So this thing has been sitting here on its own weight for a week. I flexed it, took it down into the woods a little bit, and let everything settle. Now I do realize it's going to settle even more in the future, but if you guys want, let me know and I'll take some measurements after some highway miles and just see where it sits. As of today, I'm 100% happy with this lift. Inexpensive, it lifted the Jeep as much as it said it would, it looks really good. What do you guys think? Let me know. Thanks for joining me on this journey. I hope you join me on the next one. Have a great day, and thanks for watching. In today's video, I'm going to replace the old 25-year-old wore-out suspension with an inexpensive 3-inch lift from Rough, with a 25-year-old suspension with an inexpensive lift from Rough Country. Make room for a little bit bigger tires, so won't you join me? Welcome back to the XJ, 25-year-old wore-out suspension. Welcome back to the Stanley Way XJ build. In today's video, I'm going to remove the old wore-out Jeep suspension. Dang. Welcome back to the Stanley Way XJ build. In today's video, I'm going to take out the old 25-year-old wore-out Jeep suspension. Golly.